All right. First of all, thank you everyone for coming. One in person, two on Zoom, not in that particular order, but thank you everyone for coming and making it. As I said before, so it happens to be, I've been thinking about Elisha Ben Avuya, who we'll talk about and we'll discuss him and his other name, Acher. I've been thinking about him for years. I mean, years, probably 4 years. At this point, my wife doesn't want to hear his name ever again, because I think when I first got married, I was talking about him. And the second year I was talking about him, and on and on and on. At this point, I said, oh, I'm giving a shiur on Elisha Ben Avuya. So she was not a sounding board for this one. I'll tell you that much. But Baruch Hashem, he's a character. He's part of the Tanaim. He was part of the sages during that Tanaic period, which we'll talk about a little bit of the background. And I think there's a lot to learn. Now, I just want to preface just a little about this, and that is there is a book called As a Driven Leaf, and it is a particular favorite of mine. I really did enjoy it when I read it, and I think it's the book that really put Elisha Ben Avuya Acher in my mind and on the maps for me. That being said, that it's a piece of historical fiction. A lot of what the author did was he took different midrashim, the different gemaras that we'll see, and he pulled them together to create a story. But ultimately, it's a fiction. And I have to be honest that when we think about Elisha Ben Avuya, when we think about Acher and what we're going to be learning, so it's not that we're going to sit here and judge a character, judge a sage from the times of the Gemara and the times of the Mishnah. That's not what we're going to do. We're not going to sit and figure out, well, should we be overly sympathetic or the opposite to this type of individual, right? A lot of authors, a lot of people, certainly in the historical genre, so they look at Elisha and they look at Acher, and they basically say, wow, what an opportunity to look into the past, of the historical past of someone, and should we be sympathetic towards him? Did he deserve what happened to him? Why did he go off off the way he did? So that I don't think that that's really the purpose of why Chazal, why the rabbis included him within the Gemara. Ultimately, if the rabbis included this character within the Gemara, so there's a reason he's here for us to learn from him. There's a reason why everything's in the Gemara, everything's in the Torah for us to be able to apply to our lives, and it becomes very practical. So my goal with basically these two shiurim is to take aspects of his life, to understand his perspective, his life perspective, and perhaps where he went wrong, not in a judgment, chas v'shalom, and not to sit here sympathetically, well, was he this poor character, this poor person who is misunderstood, but really to look at it from a perspective of what can we gain from this, and what are all the hints, and what are we pulling from his life, right? How is his life practical and shaykh to every single one of us? And that's the goal of this year. So just a bit of a background before we actually get into the sources here. So that's the purpose. Acher, also Elisha Ben Avuya, known as Acher, the other. Well, we'll see why. So he lived during the time of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Akiva was both a colleague and maybe a Rebbe of his. Rabbi Meir was his student, as we'll see. And he really lived in a post-bias world. He lived following, if I'm correct, he lived following the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And he lives at a very, very hard time. A hard time for Klal Yisrael, a hard time for Chazal, a hard time all around. And there's both references to him in the Yerushalmi Gemara and in the Gemara Bavli, as well as a few midrashim, and believe it or not, some of his teachings survive. Some of his teachings, because again, he was a sage, he was a Talmid Chacham, he was perhaps a rabbi at some point, so his teachings actually survived, and they were brought down in Avos de Rabbi Nassan, and there's also in Pirkei Avos, there's a few references. So overall, we have to wonder, why did Chazal, why the rabbis deem it fit to actually continue some of his teachings? If this is a person, as we're going to see, a sage turned heretic, so why should we be learning his Torah? What is there for us? So Amir Hashem, that'll also be part of it, to understand why is that part of it, and what does that tell us about him? Just by the way, was he a rabbi? So again, he was a sage. He was during this time, and certainly his colleagues were well-known names that we know of: Ben Azai, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir. Some say he never actually got smicha. He was never actually given the title rabbi. And others say he was given the title rabbi. He was known as Rav Elisha Ben Avuya, but eventually that was taken away from him when he went down the path that he went down. So let's go down that path. Let's understand a little bit, what path did Elisha Ben Avuya go down, and where did that lead him, and where does that lead us, right? So the Gemara on page 2, our first source, says as follows. Tanu Rabbanan, I highlighted it in yellow, Arba nichnesu b'pardes. So there were four people who entered into Pardes. Pardes is this, you can look at it as a very Kabbalistic world, a world in where they wanted to delve into deeper understandings of Hashem. You can look at it as a spiritual, physical place that their minds were transported to another realm. But whatever it means is that they started delving into the philosophical and theological underpinnings of Judaism. And that meant that they were trying to understand things that are really, in a certain sense, beyond our grasp. And they were going down that route, trying to see what they're going to understand there. And again, Pardes also stands for Pshat, Pardes, Pshat, Drush, Remez. So thank you. The four different levels of which a person can look at the Torah and go deeper and deeper and deeper. So they went deep and they dug very deep and they went very high, and something happened. So four went into Pardes. The Eluhain, and these are the four: Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, and Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. So there were four friends, four colleagues who all entered into this theological world, and they entered in there. And as they entered, Rabbi Akiva turned to all of his friends, his colleagues, and he said, Amar lahem Rabbi Akiva, Kishatem magin etzel avnei shaish tahar, al tomru mayim mayim. He said, when you arrive at this vision of this marble stone, of this pure marble stone, so make sure that you don't say the following: water, water. He gave them this, seemingly to us, very cryptic message where he basically said, when you see this vision, whatever this is, be sure not to say mayim mayim. Why? Because you can't speak falsehood. You can't speak sheker. As the pasuk says, Shne'amar dover shkarim la'yikon l'neged einai, Hashem can't bear falsity. And what does that mean? What was Rabbi Akiva warning his friends about that Rabbi Akiva was sensitive to, but the others weren't? And maybe if they had followed his instructions, things would have turned out better. And again, we're going to start off with a bunch of questions because a lot of this, certainly, I can't say it's going to make sense on the deeper Kabbalistic levels, but we have to understand what these Gemaras are telling us. So they all went in, Rabbi Akiva gave them a warning, and ultimately Ben Azai, Hatzis V'meis, Ben Azai had this vision and saw it, and he died, and Ben Zoma went crazy. And again, we're not going to focus on those colleagues, on those sages, of those rabbis, but they saw visions that were incomprehensible beyond our taking in. And one of them passed away. It was too much for him, and another one went crazy. But for our purposes, the Gemara continues, and it says in the yellow, Acher kitses benitios. Acher, who we know as Elisha Ben Avuya, the venerated sage of his time, friends with Rabbi Akiva. So he came out of Pardes, he came out of this theological, spiritual world, and he cut down trees. And he uprooted saplings. He cut down trees. He chopped down trees. What does that even mean? Again, are these mashalim? Are these just tried parables? What exactly does it mean? He walked out of the Pardes. He came out seemingly physically unscathed and unscathed in mind, and he took an axe and started chopping down trees. What exactly did he do? Right? And Rabbi Akiva yatsa b'shalom, but Rabbi Akiva exited in peace. By the way, the Yerushalmi, and we're going to go back and forth a few times, the Yerushalmi and the Bavli have very similar accounts, but they differ on a few details. So I believe the Yerushalmi says he was nichnas v'yatsa b'shalom. He entered and he went out in peace. So not only did he go in peace, but he came out in peace. But Acher, unfortunately, came out and something went wrong with him. And he cut down trees. And what exactly was he cutting down? What did Rabbi Akiva warn his friends? And what could have been avoided? So before we delve into all these questions, let's go to the next page to continue in the Gemara, and we'll understand a little bit deeper. The source sheet says, okay, good, the Seder. So Acher says the Gemara in source on page 2, in the yellow, says Acher kitses benitios. So Acher cut down trees. What does it mean he cut down trees? The pasuk says, Allah v'kasuv omer al titen espicha lachtias b'sarecha. And he said, do not let your mouth bring your flesh into guilt, meaning don't do something wrong. And what did he do wrong? What caused him to go off the derech? What caused him to go wrong, such that he cut down trees? So the Gemara says he saw this abnormal vision. Chaza mematron disyahav le reshusa lemesav and lemichted zechusa Yisrael. He saw this angel, this ministering angel called Mitratron, and that he was sitting down and he was writing down the zechuyos, the merits of Yisrael. And Amar Gemira Dilamala Lehave Leyeshiva V'Lei Techaros V'Lei Oref V'Lei Ifui Shema chas v'shalom shtei reshuyos. He saw an angel sitting down, seemingly in the face and the light of the glory of Hashem, and essentially he said, if this angel can be seated, and this angel has a permission to be doing what it's doing, well, it must be that there are shtei reshuyos. It must be that chas v'shalom. Essentially, there are two gods, there are two worlds, there are two entities, and there's something more than a single God. There's something more than Hashem, and he created in his mind a bifurcated world. He created in his mind that there could be two entities running the world. And of course, this angel was punished for that. But ultimately, says the Gemara, continuing in the yellow, following this vision that he had, and following his leaving and following his cutting down trees, there was a voice that came out from heaven and said, Shuvu banim shovavim chutz me'acher. Everyone can return except for Acher, except for the other, except for seemingly Acher, as we know, Elisha Ben Avuya. And he said at that moment, Amar, Ho v'itrid hahu gavra ma'hu alma. Since I don't have any chances anyway, I've been totally uprooted from this world. I don't have a chance of doing tshuva. I don't have a chance of coming back. Lepuk and lisnahu b'hai alma. Let me go enjoy the world. I have no chances. I'm done for it. Let me go enjoy myself at the very least. And so nafak acher letarbus ra. So he went down a very bad path. And nafak and ishkach zona taba. And he went to a zona, a prostitute, and taba v'amrale the lav Elisha Ben Avuya. Wait, aren't you Elisha Ben Avuya? This amazing sage, this amazing rabbi. You're coming to me. You're coming to me. And Elisha's response was, Akar pluga memishra b'Shabbos. He uprooted a radish from the ground on Shabbos, v'yayivla, and he gave it to her. And she said back to him, Acherhu, wow, you really are other. You really are another person. You're not who you were. You're not Elisha Ben Avuya anymore. And with that, Elisha Ben Avuya got his name. Elisha Ben Avuya was called Acher now, both by the sages, by everyone around him, by the Gemara. As referenced from Shemayim, seemingly, there was a baskol, there's a voice that came out from heaven that says, he's Acher, he's someone else. He's no longer the sage he was. And this female also turned to him and said, you're not who you were, you're someone else. And with that, he adopted the name Acher. And with that, he alienated himself. The rabbis alienated him. And that was it. He was cut off, essentially, from the Jewish people. By the way, he was so cut off that at some point during the Shema, during the decrees against the Jews, he actually helped the Romans. There's a Gemara in Brachos, which we'll see part of it. He ended up turning in Jews, perhaps, but certainly helping the Romans create decrees that would really break our spirit. It happens to be that the Romans were trying to break our spirit. So they knew that we keep Shabbos. So they made a decree that people had to carry things on Shabbos. And they said, two people have to carry something on Shabbos. And Acher told the Romans, by the way, the halacha really is that if two people carry, it's not a real violation. So Acher educated them in the laws of Shabbos so you could break the spirit of the Jewish people. We're talking about a person who really, really, really went bad, really went away, really went off. So what does it mean, shtei reshuyos? And what does it mean they cut down trees, right? So the imagery when I think of cutting down trees, and by the way, uprooting the radish, pulling it out of the ground, the imagery is to remove something from its roots, remove something from its source, its life source. All plants, the trees, everything gets its life source, gets it's sustained by the ground. So if you chop something down, if you uproot it from the ground, so you've completely cut it off from its source. So what did Acher do? What's the Gemara trying to tell us? Seemingly it's trying to tell us that when he left this vision, when he left this theological spiritual world, so he had seen two reshuyos. In his mind, the world was split. There's God, there's something else. There's good, there's bad. There's two worlds and something that he couldn't comprehend that it's all one. He split everything. And with that, he comes out of this vision and he chops down a tree. So physically, maybe not. Spiritually, what it meant was that he looked at the entire world as something completely separate and able to be sustained outside of God's control. God might exist, but there's other entities that run this world. And he uprooted it from its source because everything is rooted in Hashem. Hashem runs the world. Hashem gives life to every single little thing at every single moment, right? Every single second. Konei Hakol. He's constantly recreating. And so at that moment, when he said, well, shtei reshuyos, there must be another God, there must be other entities running this world. So he uprooted all of life from God. And also he took out the radish from the ground. Again, this imagery of just, I'm taking something away from its life source, cutting it off. And that's his name, Acher, other, turning his back on Hashem, seemingly because he felt that there was other entities. That seemingly that vision of Shtei Reshuyos, right? Now, what I want to do is we're going to read the following Gemaras, and we're going to now see that this wasn't just something that happened suddenly in his life. We could note that one of the Gemaras or the Midrashim say that Rabbi Akiva went in and he went out in peace. Acher didn't go in peace, so he didn't come out in peace. Acher went in with preconceived perspectives and preconceived notions that were already troubling him for his entire life. He was a person that didn't just see a vision in this spiritual world, in this spiritual state, and all of a sudden he was shook to his core and he said, there must be two Reshuyos, there must be two entities. He was a person who went in already with these doubts, with these issues, and that when he went in was then something that he saw. It's something that corroborated his belief system, and it's something that we see he carried with him for his entire life. There's a Gemara Yerushalmi that has a language of Tina Belibo, Ukuvar as Hayamakukal. He was always messed up, so to say. He always had problems. He always had issues, going all the way back actually to his bris, to his birth, as we'll see. So again, I want to see these perspectives in his life, and we'll see how that carries over to how we deal with these types of contradictions or types of things in life that a person might look at it and say, well, how could it be one God, right? How could things make sense? So Emir Hashem will read further and we'll see some of his conversations and the like. But if there's any questions now, any questions that people have, or we continue. Okay, good.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around what exactly you saw that there's two Reshuyos.
So I think the understanding, right? What does it mean that he saw Shtei Reshuyos, two entities? I think what it means is that in his mind, again, this is already thoughts he had coming, in his background and his life before, and we'll see. And I think that'll help answer your question a little bit more. But I think the vision of that there could be a malach, an angel, another type of being up there that was running the show, so to say, and was not according the right perspective or honor to Hashem in his mind, in his perspective. So he looked at that and says, wow, there's another power up here. There's another being up here. That I think that's the simple understanding. But again, we'll see on a deeper emotional level what that might mean. Yes.
I heard somewhere that Metatron specifically was like a human birth that became an angel. Maybe that's
interesting.
Like he was thinking like maybe I could be more than a human.
Interesting. I don't know. I've never heard it. It could be true, but certainly if that was true, that would be a problem, right? A person, a human made angel, maybe Eliyahu, Navi type style. I've never heard that. It could be. Yes.
The name, is that related to Micah or what's the short on that?
The angel's name? I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, I can look it up. I'm not sure.
Also, to me, it seems strange. The Gemara here seems to go back and forth. The Brisa calls him Acher, but when it's telling the story about where he comes across the prostitute, she recognizes and calls him out.
Right, Elisha Ben Avuya. Yeah. So the fact that we go between those two names speaks to this further quality of him that we'll actually talk to next week. This quality of where does he fit? So Mir Hashem, well, actually, it's a good question. Which name? Why does the Gemara constantly switch off the name? Acher Elisha Ben Avuya. Who is he? So Mir Hashem, that's a good question. We'll have to wait for next week for that.
Actually, I had one question. I'm only here by Zoom. When it says that he saw Metatron writing down the Zechuyot of Israel, is Zechuyot meant literally or Lashon Sagi Nahar?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the Rashi there. I'm not sure. But either way would be indicative that there's some being, some entity that he saw who has a certain level of power, right? Okay, let's one more question, then we'll go on.
I'm sure we'll discuss this later, but it's interesting in the part of this Gemara that we didn't discuss. It's the story that people talk a lot about him walking with Rabbi Meir, and
right.
Rabbi Meir is on foot and he's on a horse on Shabbat. And it seems like he tells Rabbi Meir, like, hey, just so you know, you can't walk any further
Right, right.
You're leaving the Tikkun Shabbat.
Yes.
So it's interesting that sort of in contrast to the story of him sort of betraying, the Jews to the Romans.
Yeah.
In this story, he kind of keeps his respect for
So
Rabbi Meir.
this is it's a good point. Meaning, sometimes we see respect, sometimes we see a total disregard. That gets a little bit more into this world of, are we sympathetic or not? But in Mirz Hashem, when we see this story about stopping at being sensitive to Rabbi Meir and telling him stop here at this point, in Mirz Hashem, we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Gemara continues in the mid on page 3. In the I guess where we left off in the middle of these yellow lines. Shal Acher es Rabbi Meir la'acher shiatza l'tar b'Yisrael. After Acher went off and did what he did, after he became completely alienated, so he was talking to his student Rabbi Meir, and he said, "My dichsiv gam ezel u'mazeh asa Elokim." What does it mean that Hashem created corollaries? Amrlo, Rabbi Meir responded, Kol ma shebara kadosh baruch hu bara kenegdo. Everything that Hashem created, he created corollaries. So bara harim, he created mountains and he created valleys. He created yamim, bara naharos. He created the oceans. He created rivers. He created things that are corollaries and connect. And Amrlo, Rabbi Akiva Rabcha Loyamar Kach, says Acher, that's not what your Rebbe taught, because again, Acher, he was a knowledgeable person, very knowledgeable. And Acher responds, what it means is Hashem created tzaddikim and Hashem created Rishayim. Hashem created righteous people, Hashem created not righteous people. Hashem created Gan Eden, he created the opposite. And everything has its opposite corollaries. And I saw in this language, it's fascinating, shtei, meaning shtei chalakim, what his language is, zeh lu'umah as Elokim. That Acher lives in this world of extremes, of the opposites. Of, well, there's the Rishayim and there's the Tzaddikim. There's the good and there's the bad. There's the Gehenna and there's the heavens. And we can imagine in his mind and the presentation that this is given, that it follows after this world of Shtei Rishuyos. So there are two entities. There's always two. There's never one. Everything that we're going to see in Acher's teachings, everything that we're going to see in his talk, hints to this language of two, never one. One is a single entity, is a unit, is Hashem. And we'll see that in contrast to Rabbi Akiva at some point. Okay, so now we go down and we continue into the story of him and Rabbi Meir, and this is the famed moment. Going down to the bottom over here in the yellow. Amar lo, Rabbi Meir responded to his Rebbe, to Acher, to Elisha Ben Avuya, and he says, he says, why don't you return? Why don't you do tshuva? Come back home. So Amar lo, kavar shamati ma'achorei hapargod. He says, I already told you. I heard a vision. I heard a sound that said, everyone can return except for Acher. By the way, look at this language. He says, I heard me'acharei ha'pargod. I heard behind this wall, behind this separation, behind. Everything's me'acharei. Everything's behind, right? Acher, seeing everything, he turns his back, and he feels like, Hashem and the world. Really, Hashem has turned his back to him. He says, I heard behind, me'acharei, from the language of Acher. All this hints to this language, this name that he took on. But he said, I've already been told I can't do tshuva. And he says, and Tanu Rabbanan, and there's a similar story that corroborates this, Maisa ba'acher shayiroche bal sos b'Shabbos, that there was one time after he went down his ways, and he was riding a horse on Shabbos, Rabbi Meir mahalich acharav, and Rabbi Meir was walking next to him. It was Shabbos. Rabbi Meir wasn't going to ride a horse, but Rabbi Meir walked with his Rebbe. And Lilmo Torah, he wanted to learn Torah from him still. Mipiv. Amar lo Meir chazor la'acharecha shekavar shiarti be'ikvei asusi ad kan tchum Shabbos. So Acher turns to his student, Rabbi Meir, and he says, stop here, Rabbi Meir, stop walking. I've calculated the distance in which we've walked, and this ends the area where you're allowed to walk on Shabbos, so you should stop here and I'll go on. I'll go on from here. So by the way, a lot of people look at this Gemara and say, yes, he was sympathetic to his student, Rabbi Meir. He was sympathetic. He said, you keep your halacha, but I'm not in that world anymore. I'm different. I'm gone. It happens to be the Yerushalmi has a much sharper language. The Yerushalmi says, essentially, die. He says, enough. The language actually, is it included here? It's not included here, but the language of the Yerushalmi is ad kan Rabbi Meir, until here die, enough. because Rabbi Meir kept trying to get him to do tshuva. Rabbi Meir kept saying, "No, what about this teaching? And what about this teaching? And you still have chances." And Elisha loses it with his student. He says, "No, die, enough. Ad kan tchum Shabbos. This is where our conversation ends, because this is where the boundaries end. So I'm going this way, you're going that way. Leave me alone." And so the Yerushalmi is much less sympathetic. Again, if we're trying to understand just what's the Chazal's perspective on it, many a times in the Yerushalmi, it's actually much harsher. We see a different side to Acher than presented in the Bavli. But the point is at this moment, he turns to him, whether sympathetically or not, and says, "Okay, Ad Kan, until here, you stop here, you go back, and I go on past this boundary." Again, I'm struck by this language of Tchum. When we talk about Tchum, when we talk about the different boundaries on Shabbos, of where a person can go, where he can walk, where you're allowed to carry, what do we call it in the Hebrew term? What do we call the different areas? The private area, the public sector, Rishos. Rishos, we call it a Rishos, an area. Why is that striking? Because what did Acher presume and decide? Shtei Rishuyos. Acher decided there are two Rishuyos, there are two entities, there are two beings. So Ad Kan Rabbi Meir, Ad Kan Tchum Shabbos, until here is the next Rishos, until here is the next boundary or area where you're allowed to go, hints to this language of there are two areas, two boundaries, there are two worlds, there are two entities. There's Shtei Rishuyos, right? Rishuyos, Tchum. It all hints to the same perspective of until here, Rabbi Meir. Listen, I get your experiences, and you still feel comfortable with Hashem and Him running the world. But Ad Kan, until there, I'm not with you. We're not on the same page. I'm going into the next Rishus. I'm going to the next entity, and you'll stay behind. It's just such a interesting hint towards the Shtei Rishuyos, right? It's such an interesting hint towards Acher's perspective, something that he really carried with him that really was a focal point in his mind, perhaps. So, what does it mean? Again, by the way, we talk about cutting down trees. So we said cutting down trees, uprooting from its source, trying to disconnect life and all purpose from Hashem. There are other accounts that what it means is he uprooted trees, is he actually went after all this, after he was struck by this vision and he couldn't turn back. He went to the Bate Midrashos, he went to the different shuls, he went to the different yeshivas, and he would go in, and some say he actually killed students learning Torah. That's the harshest language that exists out there in the Yerushalmi. And others say that he didn't quite physically kill them, but he spiritually maimed them, because he would go in and essentially preach these issues. He would say, "What are you doing? There's no hope for you. There's two gods." And he would ask them for a teaching. They would tell him, and he would refute it. And it was a mess. He uprooted Torah because he was really trying to demonstrate to others that what you're doing, there's no basis, meaning Hashem's one thing, there's other things going on, there's other entities. So this language of uprooting and cutting doesn't just have to be an example of his perspective on life, but it could be something trying to stand in for explain what he actually physically or verbally did. Okay, so again, we've talked about now Acher moving on, meaning after Pardes, after he had this vision, and it's something that very much stuck with him, being told that he can't do tshuva. And again, could he really not do tshuva? Yirmiyat Hashem, we'll talk about that next week. But certainly this idea that he had two perspectives, Shtei Rishuyos, until now it's the Tchum Rebbe Meir, until now you stay back and I'll keep going. By the way, Rebbe Meir never gave up on him. Rebbe Meir was there at his bedside when he was dying. Rebbe Meir, his entire life, believed that Elisha Ben Avuya could do tshuva. His entire life. Is it something Elisha believed about himself? Seemingly not. Seemingly not, from these Gemaras that were being told over and over. He said, "Please come back. You can do it." And Acher's response was, "I'm sorry, it's too late for me." So we went forward after Pardes. But as I said before, it seems that these perspectives was something he actually carried with him before, something that he went into that world with, something that Rabbi Akiva didn't go in with, but something that Acher himself went into this world. So what were those perspectives? What were the issues? What was the background in his life that were missing? So in Yirmiyat Hashem, we'll see page 4 in a second, but if there are any questions, so now's probably a good pausing point certainly for anyone on Zoom. Yeah, it's easier if you have a question, you can call out on Zoom. Okay.
The
Yes.
answer maybe that we'll discuss this next week, but do we presume that Acher was correctly reporting what the Bat Kol told him?
Right.
So what do we make?
So what was Acher correctly reporting what the Bas Kol was, or or maybe he misheard it. I can't give too much away on that because that is a crux of next week. That is a fantastic question. It could be he misheard. It could also be that was a correct accounting. And Emir Hashem, it's a fantastic question. But if I tell you that now, so then we don't have to meet next week. So okay, Emir Hashem, we'll get to that. Yes, Chance.
I was going to say something about what the Gemara said about Bosco.
Okay.
What you were going to say next week.
No, what was the Gemara say about Baskals?
It specifically says that like you don't rely on a Bosco as far as halacha goes.
Yeah, I did not think to include that next year, but Chance is correct. There is a Gemara that says we don't paskin like Baskals. We don't follow Baskals from Lo Bashamayim here. It's not in heaven. That's fantastic. I'm going to include that next week. Thank you, Chance. But yes,
All right,
that's a fantastic point.
There's one question in the chat. I don't know if you can see
Okay.
it there. You want me to read it? Isn't there a story about Bar Kokhba that he was strong enough to uproot trees and that was considered an asset that made him qualified to be a leader? How does that relate to the story of Elisha Ben Avuya uprooting trees?
Interesting. That's a fascinating question. Now, I'll admit the Gemara I recall was I thought he was throwing large boulders. Now it could be meaning I believe that to be true. It could be there's also a Gemara there that says he was uprooting trees. If that's the case, I don't know how it connects. That's a fascinating connection. And these things aren't a coincidence, by the way. So Amir Hashem, I'll look into that. I'll take a look. Thank you.
I believe, Rabbi, the story is that Bar Kokhba used that as a test for people to join his army.
Oh,
That
the
they were
test.
strong enough to pull out a
Interesting.
tree.
Interesting. Okay, so I don't know what metaphorically or theologically that would stand for connect here, but very interesting. Thank you for that. That's actually fascinating. I'll have to take a look at that. Yes.
Also, it's understandable why the Chachamim Chazal would call Elisha Ben Avuya Acher. But what's unusual to note is that when he's telling over what he heard in Shemayim,
First
he's
himself.
saying that in Shemayim, he said everybody else can do teshuva except Acher.
Right.
That is really unusual to note because it's one thing for Chazal, they have an agenda. They're going
Right.
to call him Acher because they considered him a heretic. But in Shemayim, to not use his,
Yes. Yes.
That's really
All the facts about who's calling him Acher, where's it coming from? Did he hear correctly? These are fantastic points, and all that get to the crux of the issue of who he was and the issues. And Emir Hashem, the name and all that stood for, that'll be Emir Hashem next week. I know I'm saying that a lot, but these are all good questions. You read these Gemaras and you're struck by all these questions, and they have to be unpackaged. Okay, so let's go into his background, his backstory. So the Gemara in the end of Chulam, the last daf, on page 4, says as follows. In the yellow, Haresha Amar Loi Aviv Allah Labira V'Havali Gozlos. So there was a father that turned to his son and he said, "Go up into a tree and bring down the birds, bring down the eggs." V'Olav Shalach Esa'im. This person went up and he sent away the mother bird as halacha dictates. The lakach esabanim, and he took the eggs. Ubechazaraso nafal v'meis. When he fell down, he tragically died. Hechan arichas yamav shalzeh. Hechan to vasal shalzeh. Where's the arichas yamim? Where's the length of life? Where's the goodness of life that's promised to a person who both follows his father's word, who does kibbud ha'avim, who respects his parents, and who also sends away the mother bird, which a person is promised long life. And yet this person did both of those, and he lost his life the second he came down. Elo laman yarichun yamecha ba'olam shekulo orach u'laman yitavlach la'olam shekulo tov. What it means is that you'll have lengthy days, you'll live long. It doesn't always necessarily mean in this world. It means you'll have a long life in the world to come, because of course, the longest life that a person lives is in the world to come, right? Our years are fleeting years in this world compared to nitzchi, compared to something that goes on forever. And so what Chazal teach us is that the length of life promised here, yes, it can be in this world, but it's not necessarily so. Now, based on this, says the Gemara continuing in the yellow on the bottom, Amar of Yosef, Umale darshe acher lahaikra karevi Yaakov bar Barsei loy chata. Had acher darshan, had he understood this concept that we just taught above, he never would have sinned. He never would have gone down the path he went down. He didn't know this teaching. I think what the Gemara means is, had he inculcated this, had he believed it, had this been something that he trusted in, so then acher would have been sound. But there was something about this teaching that he didn't believe, that didn't sit with him. And because of that, he didn't listen to it. And because of that, he had questions. And he saw a similar story. Ikeda Amri ki hai maisis. Some say that he saw this exact story happen, that a child went up to the tree and took down the eggs and sent away the mother bird. And some say that Acher saw that. And when he saw that, he had the same question: how can it be we're promised good life and lengthy life, and yet this person died? And with that set alarms off in his mind, and it sat with him. And this was all before he went into Pardes. This was all before he went into that spiritual, theological world and place with his colleagues. And this is something that sat with him. And others say, the Ikadami, others say, Lishna, the Rebbe Chutzpitz, Hamatorgaman Chaza, the Havamutelos Bashva, and Amra Pesh, Shehifik Margilos, Yelacho Afar. And another time he saw something very tragic, that Chutzpit, the Matorgaman, the translator of so much Torah, that he was assaulted, he was taken by the Romans, his tongue was cut off and left to be in the dust. But the point of what he saw was he saw tragic, very difficult things that seemed to be challenges and seemed to challenge truth in this world, that seemed to challenge things that we know from Torah. And because of that, he couldn't deal with that. He couldn't deal with the contradictions that he was facing, because he couldn't take this teaching. He wasn't convinced by this teaching of it's in the next world. There's two worlds, meaning two worlds that are all one. There's this world into the next world, and there's only Hashem. And yet he saw these contradictions in life. He saw these things in life, and he couldn't fathom. He couldn't deal with it. And that led to this breaking point in his mind of Shtei Reshuyos. There must be two entities. There's a God of good. There's a God of bad. There's something that does good. There's something that does bad. It can't all be coming from one God. It can't. And that was something that was in his mind before. It happens to be the Yerushalmi in source 4. I won't read it inside, but it says it a little starker. It says a little harsher. It says that the moment he saw this child fall, and the moment he saw these very tragic, jarring things, at that moment he denied Tchias Mason. He said, there's no such thing as a world to come. There's no such thing as a resurrection. There's no such thing as that. And a person who denies that Hashem's running the world, and that there's an ultimate purpose, that we're not going to understand everything. Because if you don't believe in the next world, if you don't believe in a resurrection, in Tchias HaMesim, and all that you believe in is what we see in this world, so then you can't fathom it. Because if all there is in this world, then there's contradictions, and I don't understand it, so it must be that nothing makes sense. Whereas if I believe in the next world, if I believe in Tchias HaMesim, if I believe in a resurrection, so there's something so much greater than me. There's something so much greater than the life I'll live. There's something so much greater than that which I can comprehend and see in life. And if I believe in that, then I can face a contradiction and say, I don't understand, but sometimes I'm not going to understand. And it's greater than me, and it's above me, because Hashem is running the world. And that's something that Acher seemingly struggled with as being presented in the Gemara. And that's something that he went into Pardes, went into that spiritual realm and that world with. And that's something that seemingly broke him. So that, I think that's the background of his experience. There happens to be one more, but I see that there's a question on Zoom. Menashe, do you mind reading that?
I don't see it. Maybe it was sent just to you.
Personally? Okay, let me just... couldn't Elisha have interpreted the verses in a broader sociological sense? Yes, perhaps he could have understood it in a broader sense. Again, Elisha Ben Avuya, if I understand, he was a sage. He was someone who believed in Torah, and so he was not going to expound it in a way that went against Torah, so to say. Meaning, this was the Masorah. This was what was passed down. But it's something that was passed down, and he just couldn't understand. And at the moment he couldn't understand all of this, so something in his mind was breaking. Something was breaking down. By the way, Elisha Acher attributes this to something else. It's not just his experiences, not just the things he saw. In source 5, the Yerushalmi tells us about his bris. And we'll say this part outside, that his bris, 8 days, he was born, and the bris comes, and they have a huge party. His father, Avuya, throws a huge party. And when I say a party, it was a party. It's like a rave, because there was no Torah, there was no Divrei Torah, there was no spiritual aspects going on. So the rabbis there turned to each other and they said, well, while this rave is going on, let's elevate this place. Let's learn some Torah. So they started learning B'chavrusa, they started learning. And it says that, the Gemara says that there was fire above their heads. Right, the Tosfos relates, the Gemara relates that a bird was singed, a bird was burned. Physically, spiritually, for our purposes, it doesn't matter. But the point is that Well, the point is that they started learning Torah, and Avuya was so struck by this, so struck by these rabbis and their power or their insistence or their fortitude, and he was struck by that, and he said, Amar Lahen in the bold, Avuya Abba, my father Avuya said, Rabosai im kachi kocha shel Torah. If this is the strength of Torah, im niskayim li ben hazel Torah ani mafrisha. So if my son grows up, I will designate him and give him to Torah. His father designated him and said, my son is going to be a sage. He's going to be a Talmid Chacham. I'm giving him over to Torah. Someone made a diak. Someone noted to me, you know what Avuya didn't say? He didn't say, I'm giving my son over to Hashem, like Chana says. Chana, when she davens for a child, as we're going to read very soon in Eretz Hashem with Rosh Hashanah, Chana davens, and she says, I'll dedicate my son to Hashem. The father of Elisha turns to him and says, I dedicate my child to Torah. It's just interesting. It's interesting to note that maybe already at the fundamental building blocks of his spiritual life, there was a dedication separate from Hashem. Of course, Torah is not separate from Hashem. The minute we separate Torah from Hashem, it's not Torah. Torah, Hashem, Yisrael, everything, it's all one. But in this language of, well, it's for Torah, the implication somehow, somewhere, is that there's some divorce from the reality of Hashem, right? Again, is that actually what mean? Was that his intention? No, probably not. But again, we already see the underpinnings, and Elisha blames his failings and his life trajectory on this. He says, I started off wrong. I started off bad. What can I do? The Yerushalmi that I said was less sympathetic about Rebbe Meir Ad Khan is actually included at the end of the source. If you want to take a minute, you can see that. Okay, so we now see essentially that this was something he sat with for his life, that he carried with him into Pardes, that he carried with him out of Pardes.
Sorry.
And yes.
So I understand your point about how Avuya said, I dedicate my son to Hashem. Is that the meaning of this last sentence?
Interesting. Right. Sorry. The last sentence says, the issue was, says Elisha, because my father did it shaloi lishma, not for the right intent. Meaning he was doing it for the intent that perhaps I would be powerful, that I would be knowledgeable, that I would be famous. That was seemingly his father's. That was seemingly what Elisha attributes the issue to.
How do we know that?
Because it seemed, again, this is Elisha telling over his bris. This is Elisha telling over what his personification of what happened or what was told to him by his father. And so he's saying, my father was struck by their power, by their might, by their influence. And for that reason, seemingly he dedicated it to me. So he said, I had a bad start. We'll talk about bad starts and good starts and failings next week. But I think that was part of this perspective, this failed perspective. And again, it's a failed perspective. It's something that he carried with him through his life. It's something he carried with him through Pardes, into Pardes, and out of Pardes. And that's really something that we see was in his mind. So now, we'll take the next few minutes. I apologize for going a few minutes over here. Let's compare him to Rebbe Akiva. We said that Rebbe Akiva went in strong and came out strong. He went in b'shalom and came out b'shalom. And we also asked, what was Rebbe Akiva's warning to his friends of Mayim, of two waters? Don't say two waters. So Rebbe Akiva's warning to his friends now, we can maybe understand that he was saying, when you go up and you're going to see these visions, and you're going to see something that looks like two, you're going to see two waters, you're going to see something that you don't fully comprehend, that you don't fully understand. So don't take it at face value. Don't look at something and say, there must be two. There must be two entities. There must be two things. There's two things in life that I don't understand, so it must be that there's not one. The same way when a person looks into water, a reflection, no one would ever think that, oh, the reflection is the water. No one would ever think that there's two people, right? It's just a reflection. It's a personification. It's a manifestation. It's not actually two entities. And so Rabbi Akiva turned to his friends, metaphorically so, and very clearly so in a Kabbalistic terms, and says, do not think, no matter what you see, that there's two. There's only one. There's one water. There's one source of life. Mayim, water. There's one source of life, and that's Hashem. And that seemingly was his warning as he went in. Now, of all people, Rabbi Akiva, it makes sense that he was the one to give such a warning. It makes sense that he was the one who went in safely and was able to come out safely. Because we have a story about Rabbi Akiva that we know about. Besides for his beautiful and fascinating past, we know the end of his life was a very tragic moment. The Gemara on page 6 tells us as follows: And I'll be reading from the yellow. Tanu Rabbanan Pam Achas Gazra Malchus Harsha Shel Yasku Yisrael B'Torah. So one time the Roman says the Jews cannot learn Torah anymore. And what did Rabbi Akiva do? Because he says, what can we do without Mayim? What can we do without Torah? Fish can't live without water. We can't live without Torah. Again, a hint to Mayim, water, right? Mayim, the two waters above. But he said we can't live without that singular water, without Torah. So he kept teaching Torah. And Amru lo hayu yamim muatim ad shetafsuhu l'Rebbe Akiva v'chavshuhu b'beis hasurim. It wasn't long until they captured him for teaching Torah. Now, b'shah shotziu es Rabbi Akiva, and again we'll read this on Yom Kippur, the Aruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs. When they brought Rabbi Akiva out on that tragic day, lahariga, to kill him, zman kriya shema haya. It was the time of saying Shema. V'hayu sorkin es besaro b'masrekos. They were combing his flesh with iron combs. V'ayimekabo alav ol malchus shemayim, and he was accepting Hashem upon himself. And Amru lo talmidav, and his students watching this, witnessing this with horror, they turned to him and they said, and they screamed, Rabbeinu Ad Khan, our Rebbe, until now, Rabbeinu Ad Khan, until now you're able to say Hashem is in control of everything, and even at this moment you're able to accept Hashem upon yourself. Why is this language striking? Rabbeinu Ad Khan. Where else do we see Ad Khan? Ad Khan, said Elisha Ben Avuya to Rebbe Meir. Ad Khan, Tchum Shabbos, until now. Rebbe Meir, until now. Scream the students of Rebbe Akiva at this moment that they can't comprehend, this pain, the suffering that they're seeing, something that makes no sense in their world, because I don't understand. Someone who taught Torah, someone who brought Hashem into this world is suffering so. Rabbeinu Ad Khan, does it make sense? I can't tell you, and I don't know this to be true because I did not see any Mefarshim who say this. But maybe one of the ones screaming this was Elisha Ben Avuya, Rabbeinu Ad Khan. Ad Khan, Rebbe Meir, until here, Rebbe Meir, there are two worlds, there are two Rishuyos, and screams the same person, Ad Khan, Rebbe Akiva, my friend, Ad Khan, until here, you think that there's something beyond here? Ad Khan, how can you take this? How can you say that there's no limit? And Rebbe Akiva responds, Amar Lahem, Kol Yamai Hayisi Mitzar, my whole entire life I was pained, I wanted. This pasuk zeh b'chol nafshecha, afilu nota as nishmascha, marti masai yavu liyadi, ve'ekaimenu. I said, Rabbi Akiva, my entire life I wanted to fulfill, giving up my soul for Hashem. V'achshav sheba liyadi lo ekaimenu, I'm not going to fulfill it. Now that I have the chance to be able to accept everything that Hashem gives me in life, the good, the bad, the good, the evil, I'm not going to accept it and know that it's all from Hashem. And he screamed out Shema, and he was Mayrich, he extended the Echad until he died at that moment. And Rabbi Akiva died with Echad on his lips, because Rabbi Akiva was a person who went into Pardes, went into that theological world, went into that spiritual world, went into his entire life with his perspective of Echad. Hashem is one, and I don't fully understand everything. I don't understand the contradictions in life, says Rabbi Akiva. I don't understand. And yet, with every single little suffering in life, with every kotes, with every thorn in my side, I say that it's all Hashem, which is what we say in Shema, by the way. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. We say, here, B'nai Yisrael, everyone listen, Hashem Elokeinu. There's two names of God, Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei, which connotes and talks about Hashem's chesed, his kindness. Hashem Elokeinu. Elokeinu is Hashem's din, his judgment, his nature. Hashem Echad. But in the end, it's all kindness. It's all Hashem. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, two names are all one. And that's how Rabbi Akiva died. Rabbi Akiva died at that moment saying, I don't understand. And it's all, there's suffering, there's good, and there's bad, but ultimately it's all from Hashem, because there's not Shnei Rishuos, there's not two worlds. And that's something that that Elisha Ben Avuya and Acher was screaming at him. Ad Khan, you can say all this bad that's happening to you, that also is from Hashem. It's not a separate world, it's not a separate entity. It's all from Hashem. And Rabbi Akiva screamed back, yeah, it's all from Hashem. That's how Rabbi Akiva faced the world. That's how Rabbi Akiva went into Pardes, and that's how Rabbi Akiva came out, because it didn't matter what he saw. He didn't understand two worlds. He didn't understand two waters. He didn't understand two visions. Ultimately, even if he didn't understand, he knew and he understood, and he completely believed that it was all from Hashem. So I'll just end with the following idea. And of course, if anyone has questions, we can discuss. But Rabbi Nachman Likutei Moharan says that 4 went into the Pardes. 4 went in to this vision. And he said, in every single Jew and every single one of us, so we each have these aspects of us. a part that can't fully comprehend, and we question, we don't, it doesn't sit well with us. There's a part of us at parts and different points in our life that it sits well, and we can get their stiras, their contradictions and challenges in life. And there's parts of us that sometimes goes crazy. There's parts of us that die within ourselves. There's parts of us that break. Every single one of us has those four people, those four personalities. But ultimately come Rosh Hashanah, and the goal is to be miyached everything back to Hashem. The goal is to be able to say, yeah, it was a hard year. It was a crazy year. Life's crazy. It's hard. And there are contradictions and challenges that I don't fully comprehend, and I probably never will. And even so, I'm going to scream out Hashem Hu Elokim at the end of Yom Kippur. I'm going to scream out Hashem Hu Elokim. Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is Elokim. There are two different names which talk about two different aspects of Hashem, but they're all one. It's all Hashem. And that's something, that's something that Rabbi Akiva inculcated into his life, and something that Mirz Hashem we can take into our own lives. There's a story, and with this I'll actually end. There's a story about the Alter Rebbe that he was taken for teaching Torah, very similar to Rabbi Akiva, and he was taken by the authorities, and they wanted to punish him. They wanted they said, "What are you doing?" And they wanted him to give up on his faith, and he wouldn't budge. Principles, Torah, he wouldn't budge, and the person there, the officer, the jail guard, whatever it was, he had a gun, and he says, this has a way of people doing away with their principles. This has a way of people doing away with their principles, their beliefs. And the Alter Rebbe turned to him and he says, that gun only scares someone who has one world but many gods. For me, I have one God and many worlds, so that doesn't scare me, because that's what a Jew lives with. We live with one God, many different worlds that we don't fully understand. We have this world, we have the next world, but ultimately we live with understanding Hashem Hu Elokim, Shema Yisrael Hashem, Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and that's the perspective that Rabbi Akiva had, and that's something that Acher, Elisha Ben Avuya himself fully couldn't comprehend. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for in person and Zoom.
One more
There are any
comment here on
questions?
Zoom.
Yeah, please, I'll take that.
Let's see here. Power user, I'm not sure who that was. Wrote, in Babel's Zoroastrianism believed in Shtei Rishiyos. Not sure if there's any connection, because Acher didn't live in Babel, but maybe he's aware. Maybe there's some.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting point to think about. All right.
But there is something, Rabbi, a little closer to home to Rabbi Elisha Ben Avuya. At this time, a lot of Christian theology was being developed, and one strand of it at that time, very strong, which actually there's some traces of it even today, is that the Satan was the ruler of this world, either by the tolerance or the authorization, temporary of God.
Right.
He does rule. He is the official ruler of this world, the Satan.
Shtei Rishuyos. Again, these are theologies maybe circling the world. It wasn't, again, the author of the As a Driven Leaf chalks a lot of this up to, the Gemara says he was always carrying these theological books with him, heretical books. So it wouldn't be so far off to say that he was reading such things and such theologies crept into his mind. But again, there had to be a hole. There had to be a broken place in which there was opportunity for them to come in. Okay, thank you, everyone. In Mirz Hashem, next week we'll talk a lot about his name and tshuva, and could he have done tshuva, and a lot of the questions that were raised. So thank you, and Mirz Hashem, I'll see you next week.
Thank
you, Rabbi.